And you were just listening to Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, Danny Danon. Before him, we heard from Iran's envoy to the United Nations. Iran's envoy to the UN said the timing, nature and scale of Iran's proportionate response to the US strikes will be decided by its armed forces. And, of course, we just heard from Danny Danon, who said that Iran used negotiations as camouflage to buy time to build missiles and enrich uranium. So a war of words taking place there at the United Nations Security Council. We will be following that closely this evening. But welcome to the news at 10. I'm Yalda Hakim, and Donald Trump said tonight that America had taken the bomb right out of Iran's hands as he hailed what he called a spectacular military success. Iran's three most important nuclear sites were targeted in a coordinated assault from air and sea. Satellite images show significant damage at ground level, but the extent of the damage to underground facilities isn't yet clear. Iranian media is reporting that Iran's atomic agency says the sites are quickly being rebuilt and that nuclear activity will continue with greater power. Well, the operation was codenamed Operation Midnight Hammer and involved more than 125 aircraft. It marked the moment America forcefully intervened in the conflict between Israel and Iran. At 2:10 a.m. local time, the United States dropped the first bunker-busting bomb onto Fordo, a uranium enrichment plant hidden in a remote mountainside vital to Iran's nuclear ambitions. The U.S. then hit two other nuclear sites, Natanz, another uranium enrichment facility, and Isfahan, a significant research base understood to store much of Iran's highly enriched uranium stock. However, Isfahan was struck by Tomahawk missiles launched from a U.S. submarine rather than by B-2 stealth bombers. Soon after, Iran launched retaliatory strikes towards Israel, triggering countrywide air raid sirens. Our U.S. correspondent James Matthews has our first report tonight on America's attacks.
They attacked in the dead of night. These pictures from Isfahan capture the sight and sound of the U.S. assault on Iranian nuclear sites. It was the biggest decision of Donald Trump's presidency so far and his biggest gamble. They called it Operation Midnight Hammer, as seen in the Situation Room. This was how it looked on Saturday night. This was how it sounded on Sunday morning in a Pentagon briefing.
It was an incredible and overwhelming success. The order we received from our commander-in-chief was focused, it was powerful, and it was clear. We devastated the Iranian nuclear program.
New details revealed a U.S. deception plan that had sent B-2 bombers flying west as decoys, while the B-2s involved flew east towards Iran, with bunker buster bombs primed and ready. As the president made a Saturday night return to the White House, 7 B-2 bombers had Iranian nuclear facilities in their sights. They included Fordo. It's believed to be Iran's main nuclear enrichment site, deep underneath a mountain. MOP bombs, massive ordnance penetrators, were deployed here. Other locations were hit at Natanz and Isfahan. U.S. nuclear submarines fired Tomahawk missiles.
Tonight I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
The president spoke of total obliteration. His top military man revised that downwards, pending full damage assessment.
All three sites sustained extremely severe damage and destruction. More than 125 U.S. aircraft participated in this mission, including B-2 stealth bombers, multiple flights of fourth and fifth generation fighters, dozens and dozens of air refueling tankers, a guided missile submarine, and a full array of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft.
After the strike, the Americans said this was about peace and ending Iran's ambitions to build a nuclear bomb. Nothing more.
But our view has been very clear that we don't want a regime change. We do not want to protract this or build this out any more than it's already been built out. We want to end their nuclear program, and then we want to talk to the Iranians about a long-term settlement here.
While the Trump administration urged Iran back to the negotiating table, Iran's foreign minister said the door on diplomacy had closed.
The warmongering and lawless administration in Washington is solely and fully responsible for the dangerous consequences and far-reaching implications of its act of aggression.
Following the American attack, Israeli strikes on Iran continued through Sunday as the UN Security Council met to discuss the situation, and its Secretary General spoke of grave alarm.
The people of the region cannot endure another cycle of destruction. And yet, we now risk descending into a rat hole of retaliation after retaliation. The United Nations stands ready to support any and all efforts toward a peaceful resolution. But peace cannot be imposed. It must be chosen.
This is a conflict with many moving parts, moving civilians to fear for the future.
Neither party are telling the truth about whether there has been contamination as a result of the strike. The task is not to allow this region to turn into another Chernobyl. I think the war is going to expand, even though people here in Tehran say it is going to end. I think the government may close the Strait of Hormuz.
Attacking Iran is an intervention by an American president with unpredictable consequences. The US says it's in touch with Tehran, privately and publicly, giving it every opportunity to come to the table for talks and for peace. If this momentous decision has been criticized internationally, it has been domestically too. Many in the MAGA movement, which put Donald Trump in power, are unhappy at his engagement in a foreign conflict. Many in Congress are unhappy that he didn't inform them first. A world that waited for America to strike now waits for Iran to strike back. The United States has spoken of an attack of precision and certainty. Neither applies to what comes next. James Matthews, Sky News, in Washington.
Well, Donald Trump's former National Security Advisor John Bolton told me earlier that he supported the president's decision to attack Iran's nuclear facilities. Have a listen.
Well, I think Trump made the right decision for the United States in attacking the Iranian nuclear weapons program. I thought we should have done this for many years ago, up to 20 years, maybe even more. But it's better that it comes now than not at all or too late. I do think that there's plenty of work to do. I don't think anybody really believes that it's over on day one. And I think part of the problem that remains was caused precisely by Donald Trump agreeing to 60 days of negotiation with the Ayatollah Khamenei, during which time the regime, duplicitous as ever, was moving whatever it could out of places like Natanz and Esfahan and Fordo. So negotiation time is always on the side of the nuclear proliferator, and that appears to be proven here again today.
That was John Bolton speaking to me a little earlier. Let's bring in our Mark Stone, who joins me live from Washington this evening. And Mark, we've been hearing Donald Trump a lot in the last 24 hours, but he's issued a couple more statements on Truth Social.
Yes, since his address to the nation yesterday, he has been at the White House, but we've not seen him. But in the last 20 minutes or so, 3 posts on Truth Social, which I think kind of point to the different aspects of this story of what we've seen unfold over the course of the past 24 hours. First, and I think the most significant of these 3 posts, is a reference to regime change. This is a hint at what next, what America plans to do next. He says, and he tweeted 14 minutes ago, it is not politically correct to use the term regime change. But if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? And then he writes, MIGA, make Iran great again. He's coining a phrase there, an adaptation of MAGA, but a very significant tweet. He seems to be flirting with the idea of perhaps changing the regime. It's kind of an extension of what he said in his statement to the address to the nation last night, where he insisted that what he wanted this past 24 hours to be was one strike, one series of strikes, and a line drawn. Iran then comes to the negotiating table or conforms to what America is demanding that it does, which is quit altogether its nuclear program. It is hard at the moment to see that happening, but the fact that he's now flirting with regime change, that is significant indeed. The second, and linked to what I just said, the second post, he talks about, in another post, about the damage to Iran's nuclear sites is monumental. The hits were hard and they were accurate. Great skill was shown by our military. This is kind of pushing back on a few noises that we've heard over the course of the day from different people, some indeed within his administration, suggesting that maybe these strikes last night were not as monumental as first thought. Donald Trump saying it completely destroyed Iran's nuclear programs. Since then, we've heard J.D. Vance, the vice president, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the top general as well, saying, look, it's going to take a little time to work out how successful these strikes were. And behind the scenes, experts have said to us repeatedly, you can't completely remove Iran's nuclear program just by airstrikes. And then finally, we've had word that the B-2 bombers who carried out this raid have now returned to their base in Missouri. Donald Trump said the great B-2 pilots have just landed safely in Missouri. Thank you for a job well done. These pictures from Missouri, from the Whitman Air Force Base, an extraordinary, I mean, in simple military terms, an absolutely extraordinary mission. They flew for 37 hours non-stop. They were refueled multiple times in the air. A whole load of planes around them as they made that journey across the Atlantic into the Middle East, dropped those bunker busters, and then returned to Missouri.
Yeah, as you say, Mark, an extraordinary operation there. Well, the U.S. Defense Secretary was clear the strikes had devastated the Iranian nuclear program, but Tehran has denied it suffered a major blow. The world's nuclear watchdog says it has detected no increases in radiation from the three sites, which may indicate that nuclear material had already been moved. Well, our science and technology editor Tom Clark looks at the damage done by the U.S. strikes.
It was a massive display of force and a series of firsts. The largest ever operational deployment of American B-2 bombers, armed for the first time with 14 of these, its most powerful bunker-busting bombs. Operation Midnight Hammer involved 7 B-2 bombers, 125 warplanes in total, as well as warships and submarines that hurled as many as 75 precision weapons at Iran's nuclear facilities in just 25 minutes. The Pentagon saying the first B-2 dropped its massive ordnance penetrator, or MOP, in the early hours of the morning.
As the president stated last night, the remaining bombers then hit their targets as well, with a total of 14 MOPs dropped against 2 nuclear target areas.
One was the Natanz uranium enrichment facility, its underground centrifuge halls targeted that Israeli raids couldn't reach last week. But the toughest target was Fordo, believed to be Iran's most sophisticated uranium enrichment plant, 60 miles south of Tehran, built in tunnels shielded by 80 metres of mountain above, beyond the reach of even a 13-ton bunker-buster bomb, but not perhaps 12 of them. In this satellite image from before the attack, you can see Fordo's security perimeter and 3 tunnel entrances. Compare that to after the strike, these grey areas, presumably dust and debris from the attack zone here. Take a closer look. This was the mountainside before the raid, and here you can see 2 distinct strike zones, each hit with at least 3 bombs. Analysts suggest these details may be ventilation shafts, potential weak points chosen so the bombs carried their explosive payload as deep as possible. So was Donald Trump right to claim Iran's nuclear ambitions have been obliterated? Evidence suggests otherwise. Satellite images support Iran's claims that it removed highly enriched uranium and equipment from Fordo before the attack and filled in its tunnel entrances.
Trump's statement that the whole thing has been obliterated implies that, yes, Fordo might have been, but the actual material, certainly the knowledge and many enrichment machines have been moved, and hence that may be a setback for a few months, but it certainly has not wiped out their capability.
The real impact on Iran's nuclear ambitions won't be known until the dust from this assault has settled. And given the number of bombs America just dropped, that could be some time. Tom Clark, Sky News.
Well, Iran has warned that America's attack will have everlasting consequences. One of those consequences could be the targeting of the globally important Strait of Hormuz, through which nearly a third of the world's seaborne oil is transported. Our international affairs editor Dominic Waghorn reports on Iran's options on how to respond.
President Trump has plunged the US into this war with probably the most extreme option he had available. So what happens next, and how likely is this conflict to expand further? Iran is almost certain to retaliate. Not doing so would make it look even weaker. So what could it target? The US has military bases throughout the Middle East: Qatar, Kuwait, Iraq and Saudi Arabia. Killing Americans might be a priority for Iran to try and drive a wedge between Trump and his MAGA supporters back home, who say America is getting drawn into yet another Middle Eastern war, risking US lives. Iran could attack Americans directly with drones and missiles, or use proxies in the Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon has been massively degraded by Israel. More likely, Iran would use militias it backs in Iraq, or the Houthis based in Yemen, whose truce with the US appears to be in tatters. All that would invite massive retaliation, of course, from America, so Iran might prefer asymmetrical options. In that case, Britain could also be a target. Could all this lead to terror attacks in the UK? In the region, there are two stretches of water to worry about, both strategically vital. The Houthis could threaten shipping in the Red Sea, while Iran could directly target vessels in the Persian Gulf, as they've done before, harassing ships with smaller boats, firing rockets at them and seizing them. Now, if the Gulf goes up in flames, expect a big hit to the global economy and the price of oil too. The Iranians have threatened to shut off the Strait of Hormuz, this choke point through which a third of the world's seaborne oil passes. All this would send shockwaves through the world's financial markets. The US has massively increased its presence to retaliate to any retaliation, with no less than 3 aircraft carrier battle groups in the region. As things stand, this is almost certain to escalate, but could it also widen and suck other nations into the conflict? Russia and Iran have a strategic partnership agreement, but it doesn't require Moscow to come to Iran's support. Iran is also China's closest ally in the Middle East, but Beijing is also likely to sit this one out, it's thought, and watch from the sidelines. The priority for Iran's leadership is to survive, to fight another day, and redouble efforts eventually to build the bomb. If Israel can't change the regime in Iran, which isn't easy, it'll have to manage the Iranian threat and cut it down to size from time to time. That could mean years more military action and could be hugely costly for both Israel and its American backers. So Iran is in a very tight spot, but the future could be challenging for both Israel and America too.
Dominic Waghorn there. Well, let's bring in our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, who joins us live from northern Iraq, from Erbil. Stuart, good to see you. I feel like we've been talking to each other for 24 hours straight. But as Iran weighs up its options at the moment and what to do next, no doubt Iraq will be feeling incredibly vulnerable.
And it's something they've just got to accept, I suppose, and it is very difficult for them because on the one hand you have the Shia-led government that is very close to Iran, and its militias within this country take their orders to a great degree from Iran, and yet it has good relations and is dependent upon the United States in a whole number of reasons, not least controlling Islamic State here. So it has to keep on both sides. What it really needs is for diplomacy to come back in again. But as Dominic was saying in that report, it seems unlikely that Iran will do nothing. So what will it do? Well, it could attack bases here, American interests here, and also it's been said civilians here and across the region. That is a distinct possibility, and it's been talked about in the past. It could do that itself, or it could use the militias that are based here And they are on the record of saying that they would attack American interests here if America was to get involved. So it's a bit of a knife edge for the government. They've only got so much control over the militias that work within the military system here and are very powerful in their own right. But they have to keep the United States on board as well. They'll be hoping, as I say, that it goes back to diplomatic efforts and that it doesn't extend any further.
Stuart, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there from Erbil. Now, Iran's immediate response to the US attack involved firing more than 40 missiles towards Israel. Sirens blared in major cities and several buildings sustained extensive damage. Tonight, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his country is close to achieving its goals of destroying Iran's nuclear program. Well, Sky's Cordelia Lynch reports on what impact the strikes will have on Israel.
Glass-filled streets, scattered shrapnel, and the skeletons of homes. The people of Ramat Aviv woke with a shuddering jolt, and buildings decimated by an Iranian missile. Orly is picking up what little of her life she can.
I'm living in the apartment over the other side. The apartment itself is ruined totally.
These are images from inside, the attack wiping out nearly everything she owned. America has now got involved.
Yeah, I know.
How does that shift your view of this war?
I thought from the beginning that this is a justified war. I still think that. I hope it will make the war a little bit shorter. But other than that, it was a threat to Israel, and it's a threat that should be eliminated. And I hope it would be they will do it fast, because the suffering is very, very hard.
But there were no casualties. A community safely hunkered down in shelters, the new normal in Israel. Animals, not bodies, being pulled from the wreckage.
Are you surprised by the level of destruction?
Oh, yeah. I guess anyone would be surprised. It's not a nice thing to see, but lucky for us, it's only damage, no casualties.
Israel got the support of a superpower, the critical might of America's military. But that doesn't insulate it from further attacks.
When you're looking at number, Israel is doing an incredible job at intercepting the vast majority of those being targeted. But the point here isn't that there's rockets getting through. The point here is that there's rockets being fired at our civilian communities, and I can't emphasize that enough.
Well, here you can see up close homes completely destroyed. This is a residential neighborhood with a lot of apartment blocks, people's belongings here just hanging over the edge. And despite this intense level of destruction, what strikes you here is that so many people support what Israel is doing. They believe Benjamin Netanyahu needed to strike, and they welcome America's intervention. They hope and believe that might bring a quicker conclusion to this conflict.
It's not fear that hangs in the air in this neighbourhood. It's hope, acceptance, and on the political stage, gratitude and platitudes.
Last night, President Donald Trump took a historic resolution, a resolution which can change the entire trajectory of the Middle East to a better future.
This may be a critical chapter, but it's not the epilogue of the story. It's a moving conflict between two well-armed enemies, both political outliers, one that could easily spill across the region, with millions caught in the crossfire. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Tel Aviv, Israel.
And Cordelia joins me now live from Tel Aviv. And Cordy, we were seeing the damage and the destruction in your piece there. Benjamin Netanyahu has been speaking this evening, and it feels to me, just looking at that readout, that he is bracing the people of Israel for more such attacks.
Yes, I think that's right, Yalda. He is hinting at them coming closer to a conclusion, whilst also trying to prepare his nation
for a prolonged conflict too. I think there are no concrete commitments yet for him. But he did say in this impromptu press conference that they were getting closer to their goals, step by step, of eliminating the ballistic missile threat and, critically, that nuclear threat. He said that they are nearing what they need. Interestingly, he reflected on the destruction and the damage done to Iran's nuclear facilities, and some of his language sounding very different to Donald Trump, who spoke of obliterating the Fordo site. Instead, Netanyahu said that it took a bad hit. He did, though, say that they've been able to eliminate the scientists, much of the infrastructure around these sites. He said they have developed, or at least come across, interesting intelligence on the enriched uranium that they are trying to track down. A lot of discussion, a lot of speculation about some of the uranium having been moved away from Fordo before this American strike, but he didn't elaborate on that. And so there is a lot still to assess here about the degree of threat, about the degree of damage, and therefore the degree of jeopardy going forward.
Cordelia, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there. Now, Sir Keir Starmer told our political editor just days ago that he didn't see an attack, an American attack rather, on Iran as imminent. Today, after that attack, he urged de-escalation in the region. Tonight, he spoke to Donald Trump. Well, let's bring you our next report from Beth Rigby, who reports on the British response to the strikes.
The Prime Minister was at his country retreat Chequers when the US struck Iran. Dawn breaking on a sleepless night for Sir Keir Starmer, who has for days been pressing Donald Trump to de-escalate. These strikes not what the Prime Minister wanted. Now his task to try to reassure. Lots of people watching you speak this morning will be very worried about the news overnight that the US has carried out 3 strikes on Iran. Does the UK support US strikes against Iran?
Well, we've long had concerns about the Iranian nuclear programme and been very clear that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. The US has now taken action to alleviate that threat. It is important that we now de-escalate the situation, stabilise the region, and get the parties back around the table to negotiate. And I've been speaking with international leaders this morning to that end. So I want to reassure the British public that we're doing everything we can.
Do you agree escalation seems very real? And are you prepared to offer military support, UK military support, if needed?
Well, my focus is on de-escalating the situation. I accept your challenge that there is a risk of escalation. That's a risk to the region. It's a risk beyond the region. And that's why all our focus has been on de-escalating.
The PM treading carefully, offering neither overt support nor criticism of these attacks, as he went from making this public statement to remotely joining an emergency Cobra meeting. Simply too many calls with world leaders to get back to London in time. Back in Downing Street, the Foreign Secretary and Middle East Minister into number 10. This is the first time the US has ever ordered airstrikes on Iran. It wasn't the outcome our Prime Minister was expecting when we spoke at the G7 in Canada, but days ago. It sounds like an American attack could be imminent. Do you know what's going on?
Well, I don't think you should read into that an American attack is imminent.
That prediction proved incorrect, a point I put to the PM today. He's done exactly the opposite of what you said you thought he was going to do. Do you feel foolish, frustrated that he's not listening?
Well, it's clearly a fast-moving situation, and there's been a huge amount of discussions in the days since the G7 ended, and the US has now taken the action to alleviate the threat that Iran's nuclear programme poses.
Other politicians more fulsome in their support for Trump's strikes.
America's actions were absolutely essential. We have got to the stage, as we've seen actually in the last 9 days or so, where Iran coming to the negotiation table simply was not happening in any constructive way.
The Prime Minister's trying to reassure us today about these unprecedented strikes. He's hitting the phone, scrambling to try and de-escalate what is clearly a very dangerous and unfolding situation. But really, what's more instructive, I think, isn't what the Prime Minister has said, but what he hasn't said today, because the simple reality is that Trump isn't really listening to allies like the UK. That's worrying in itself, but it becomes even more alarming if this situation does escalate and the UK government is forced to take decisions around military intervention without much influence over the president. Everyone here nervously awaiting how Iran might respond. The UK now moving more military assets to the region. This PM deeply opposed to war, but stopping it not in his gift. Beth Rigby, Sky News.
Well, let's bring in our political correspondent, Serena Barker-Singh, who joins us from Downing Street tonight. And Serena, we heard the Prime Minister there say in Beth's piece that he'd been speaking to world leaders. We understand he's now spoken to Donald Trump. Just to read out of that.
Yes, exactly. This is the first time he's spoken to Donald Trump since those US strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. I've got the statement here with me, but there's not much detail, to be honest, but I'll give you what I have. They said the leaders discussed the situation in the Middle East and reiterated the grave risk posed by Iran's nuclear program to international security. They discussed the actions taken by the United States last night to reduce the threat and agreed that Iran must never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon. They discussed the need for Iran to return to the negotiation table as soon as possible and to make progress on the lasting statement. And then they also agreed to stay in close contact in the coming days. I think what's striking about that comment is it doesn't directly address the US strikes. It just says they discussed the actions taken by the United States. It isn't a ringing endorsement of support from the UK there. This was something that, as you saw in Beth Rigby's package, Starmer was asked today, and he didn't say explicitly that he supported them, but he continued saying that his priority now was on de-escalation and bringing Iran back to the negotiation table, which seems to be what the statement is doing here, straddling both of those things quite neatly. But as you saw, the Prime Minister incorrectly predicted where Donald Trump was going to go only last week. You had David Lammy travelling to Geneva saying the same things, that the negotiation would be the right course of action, whilst Trump today is saying completely the opposite, saying 3 sites has been obliterated, completely different languages. It seems that the UK is out of step publicly with what the US had been plotting privately. I think that is just shows the perils of working with a president that acts unilaterally and maintains to be proving to be unpredictable.
Serena, thank you so much for that readout. Well, we're now almost 24 hours since that strike was launched. It was about 2:10 a.m. in the morning local time. In about 2 hours is when we will reach that time when we got news that this attack on 3 nuclear sites had been launched by the United States. Since then, a lot of statements, a lot of comments from the US President, from the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel here, and of course from the Iranian side. The Iranians remain defiant tonight, and this now is a region on edge where there is now a lot of jeopardy and risk as we wait and see what Iran does next. But Kamali, back to you in the studio.
Yalda and team, thank you for that. Well, coming up next here on Sky News, we're going to take a first look at tomorrow's papers in our press preview. I'm pleased to say tonight we're joined by the broadcaster and commentator Duncan Barks and the journalist and author Christina Patterson. Guys, thanks for being with us. Among the stories we'll be discussing, of course, the US attack on Iran. This is from the front page of the Metro. Their headline, hammered. We'll be right back.